Last night's Mass, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of our school. We had current and past teachers and staff present. It was a wonderful celebration of the liturgy, and then also we had a dinner afterwards. And I shared with them that most, if not all of us, have been influenced in a positive way by teachers in our lives. I know for myself, there are many. I think of Mrs. Hanson. She was my 5th grade teacher. She had the patience of a saint. And you know, we were in a very small, very rural school. In fact, the school no longer exists because there's so few people up there. They have to now go 20 miles out of their way to go to school. But when I was there, because in that grade, I had some learning challenges, learning difficulties. And we had few resources. But she used the greatest of all resources which she had available, and that was her time. She gave me of her time, not just during class, but before class, after class. She got me through that. You know, it could have easily been the other way, where I would have hated school and hated learning. But she instilled in me a love of learning that is still with me today. And after 2 doctorates, I can thank her as one of those people that inspired me to learn. I think of Mr. Stousing. He was my 8th grade history teacher. He was tough but fair. And by that I mean he was tough on everyone. And he put the fear of God in you. You know, back then we had corporal punishment, you know. And he put his paddleboard on the wall so that all the students could see it. And he even modified it. He drilled holes in it. And he told us, you know, he did that so that there would be less wind resistance, you know. And he knew how to use that paddleboard. Thankfully, I was not one of those students that felt it on my rear end. But the thing was, not only did he instill a fear and respect, he instilled and motivated us to learn. He was a master teacher. And we loved history because of him. We looked forward to going to his class. You know, I was going through one of my closets some time back, and I found my final exam from his class. I got 100%. And he wrote a nice note on the back of the exam, which I've kept to this day. And then I think of Mrs. Bertrand. She was my high school speech and English teacher. Now, the thing that I remember about her the most is that, you know, even though she was young at that time, she was in her mid-20s, she was in a lot of pain. She was, I guess all of her life had been ravaged by the pain of rheumatoid arthritis. And it really kind of had an effect on her body. I remember her hands were deformed, and she could barely hold a pen or pencil. But she was very committed and very kind. She always had a smile on her face. You would never know that she was in pain. You know, in our senior year, we voted her as our favorite teacher, and we honored her in our school yearbook. I had my first public speech in her class. I did awful. And I could have said right then, forget it, I'm not doing any more of that anymore. But she encouraged me and to do better. And even today, even as I speak to you now, I still think of her and encouraged to continue to do better. All of us, and there are many more teachers that have had a positive influence on my life, and all of us have had those experiences. And all of them are just a glimpse. They share with us just a little bit of what God, the divine teacher, is to all of us. You know, in fact, in the biblical story, in the whole story of salvation, all of that can be viewed as God's instruction, manifested most supremely in Jesus Christ, who taught with compassion and clarity, who taught with power and authority. In fact, in our gospel this morning in Mark, he establishes himself, as Mark says, by teaching as one with authority, which was different from the rabbis and the scribes of that time, because the tradition was to teach with precedence, meaning that you would teach on the backing of past rabbis. You know, much like what scholarship is today on what is the literature of the time. And so that's what scholars of that time did. They spoke by way of what did the past rabbis said on this particular issue. But Jesus did it differently. He spoke on his own authority, which was quite new and quite different. In fact, it was refreshing. More importantly, it was transforming. And unlike the rabbis of that time, he didn't teach just in a specific place, the synagogue, or to a specific group, exclusively to a specific group of people, his pupils. Jesus had his disciples and his close band, but he taught to everyone, everywhere. He taught on the highways and the byways of Galilee. He taught in the towns and villages. He taught in the deserted places and in the fields. He taught in the synagogues, but he taught in people's homes. He taught in a boat off the shore of Galilee to all who would listen and hear him. And he went to them and taught to them, taught the concerns that were on their mind. But more importantly, my friends, that authority was based upon his actions and his deeds. You know, he taught with authority that was backed by the many miracles and also the healings that he had done. But it was his compassion and his selflessness and sacrifice which becomes a model now, an example for all of us. To be an imitator of Christ has its roots in that initial call, that first call to those early disciples that Jesus had. If you remember our gospel last week, when Jesus said to those first disciples, "Come, follow me," in the roots of that is to be an imitator of Christ. We can never be greater than the teacher, but we can be like the teacher. We can imitate him. We can be like Christ to others. That's what St. Paul says so often in his letters. To be an imitator of me, he says, is to be an imitator of Christ. You know, I remember an article that was written by John Powers. You may not know that name. He's a best-selling author and playwright. And he is a product of Catholic schools. And he was writing the article about his experience in 8th grade. His teacher was Sister Mary Lee. Now, Sister Mary Lee, as he described her, was about 1 billion years old and 3 foot tall. And, you know, see, that's the thing about Catholic school sisters back then. They had a unique retirement system. It was called death. Anyway, she was a legend to the kids. She put the fear of God in them. You know, they feared Sister Mary Lee more than they feared God. You know, they believed in God, but they had met Sister Mary Lee. No one wanted to annoy her. You didn't want to annoy her at all. And nobody ever did it twice. She was the kind of person, he said, that when you were her student, you would, and you saw her walking down the street, you would go blocks out of your way to avoid her. But because she was such a profound teacher and had such an incredible influence on her students, when you grew up, when you were an adult, she was the first person you wanted to see, the first person you looked for. And that's what he did. Years later, after becoming a successful author and playwright, he went back to his elementary school. It was in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock. The bell rang, the kids left for home. Soon thereafter, the teachers were leaving. And he didn't see Sister Mary Lee. She was still in her classroom. So he went into the school, was walking down the hallway, and there she was. She came out of that same classroom that she had been teaching for so many years. And she was hobbling down the corridor. And he described her as now being about 5 billion years old and about 1.5 inches tall. And he went up to her and said, "Sister Mary Lee, my name's John Powers. I was one of your students in 8th grade so many years ago. Do you remember me?" And she looked at him and she said, "Oh, yes, John Powers. And then she paused and she said, "I'm sorry, all grades are final." Jesus speaks as one with authority. He teaches as one with authority. My friends, we could never be greater than the teacher, but we are called to be like the teacher, to be imitators of Christ. So as we come together this morning, let's ask the Lord to always give us the grace to be imitators of Him in our words and more especially in our deeds, so that all those who see us may in turn imitate the master teacher, divine person to whom we celebrate and worship today. God bless you.